Many people in the West who have developed an interest in the Buddha Dharma are nevertheless confused about the various iterations of the Buddha's teachings. In general, there are three schools of Buddhism called the Triana, or three vehicles. These are the Hinayana, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana. This term yana, or dekpa in Tibetan, literally means a vehicle or conveyance. It is explained to be that which upholds, for instance, that which upholds a lineage. So today, I thought I would talk a little bit about what makes each of these vehicles unique, but also, regardless of their differences, what defines them as a single, unified path. And in this way, hopefully to help you make an informed decision about your own future spiritual journey. Now, many people new to Buddhism are attracted to the methods and philosophy of these teachings, but few have more than a rudimentary understanding of what makes Buddhism distinct from other spiritual traditions. In the Mahayana, or greater vehicle, it is believed that the Buddha gave three distinct sets of teachings, and furthermore, that these three sets of teachings, called the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma, respectively embody the philosophical substrate of these three teachings. It should be noted here that this presentation is not accepted by all schools of Buddhism. That notwithstanding, what is commonly accepted by all Buddhists, however, is that the Buddha taught the three baskets, or Tripitaka. These are the three categories of teachings essential for achieving liberation from the mundane world, or samsara as it's called. Associated with these three collections of teachings, there are also three trainings. Those being the training in discipline, the training in meditation, and the training in intelligence. Moreover, these three trainings are respectively taught to be the remedies for the three principal mind poisons of desire, anger, and fundamental ignorance. Now, whereas there are obvious differences in the external aspects of these three traditions, nevertheless, one should understand that the Hinayana, that is the very foundation of all the Buddha's teachings, is assumed within the teachings of the Four Noble Truths that the Buddha taught at Varanasi Deer Park during the first turning of the wheel. Now, although at first glance the classification of the three schools or vehicles of Buddhism can seem rather confusing, there is a simple way to differentiate between them, and that is in terms of cardinal location. This system divides them into Southern Buddhism, Eastern Buddhism, and Northern Buddhism. We also refer to something called Western Buddhism, but in general, this includes all three main traditions and doesn't refer to a distinct school. Southern Buddhism refers to the Theravada that is found in such countries as Thailand, Burma, and Sri Lanka, etc. Now, in general, Buddhist monastics, including novices, both men and women, will shave their heads. But you can identify the monastics of the Theravada tradition because they generally wear yellow robes that comprise only a skirt and a shawl. The upper body of the monk is often left bare, and they may also be barefoot. This tradition mostly exists in hot countries, and so the minimal amount of clothing is quite suitable. But in northern Burma, for example, the monks may wear more clothing, similar to the monks in Tibet. The lay practitioners of the southern school generally just wear ordinary colorful clothing. But novices, that is monks and nuns in training, will wear completely white or pink clothing. Lay practitioners in Southeast Asia will also sometimes wear completely white clothing. but they do not shave their heads. The Eastern tradition is associated with China, Korea, and Japan, but is also found in countries like Vietnam. So basically, this is what we call Zen Buddhism. And although there is some variation in the color of their monastic robes, the Korean monks, for example, wear something that looks like a gray karate suit as a kind of casual attire. The postulates, or novices, however, may wear yellow or mustard-colored robes. As with the Southern tradition, you can't really identify the lay practitioners from their clothing. But volunteers at the temple, who are usually upasakas, that is, lay people who keep a certain amount of precepts, will often wear the same gray karate suit that looks rather like a pair of oriental pajamas. The only difference is that these lay practitioners do not shave their heads. The Northern tradition is associated primarily with Tibet and Bhutan, but is also found in places like Mongolia. The monastics wear maroon or red robes, and the upper body is fully covered, often with a yellow shirt and also a maroon-colored vest. Basically, the monks wear the same robes as the Dalai Lama, and so most people will be familiar with this style of monastic robe. The vast majority of Tibetans are Buddhists, and although they do not wear any special clothing that identifies them as such, nearly all Tibetans wear ornaments associated with the Vajrayana or Tantric tradition. For example, nearly all of them carry malas, and many will also carry a prayer wheel. The novices, or samaneras as they are called in Sanskrit, wear almost identical clothing to the fully ordained monastics. But the skirt is of a more simple design, and sometimes they do not wear the maroon vest on top. You will also see people who look like monks, but who have long hair. These are mantra practitioners. They are essentially householders, and they are often married and also drink alcohol, for example. It is said that shortly after enlightenment, the Buddha taught the Dharma for the first time to a small group of 5 mendicants who were previously his closest companions on the spiritual path. As these teachings are the very foundation of all the Buddha's teachings, this tradition that upholds them is known as the foundational vehicle, or the Hinayana. What signifies any spiritual or religious tradition is threefold, that being view, meditation, and conduct. In terms of view, the Hinayana primarily supports the belief that the mundane world, or samsara as it's called, is nothing but suffering, and that transcendence from this suffering is peace. This is what we call nirvana. It states that the cause of this suffering is craving, or trishna, and furthermore, that in order to be liberated from suffering, one must follow the Noble Eightfold Path. In general, there are taught to be 2 types of meditation. 1, abiding in tranquility, or shamatha, and 2, insight, or vipassana. In terms of insight meditation, the followers of the Hinayana recognize the truth of the 3 signs of existence, those being impermanence, suffering, and non-self, as these arise to the subjective awareness. In terms of conduct, the followers of the Hinayana keep strict monastic discipline, as it is taught in the Vinaya, that is, the scripture that teaches the monastic rules, but also rules for lay people who may keep an uncertain or certain amount of vows. The Hinayana, or Theravada, as it's known, is the tradition that most people will associate with Buddhist monasticism. The monastics completely leave their worldly lives behind. They cut themselves off from the mundane world and go from the family home into homelessness. They live in a monastic community where the men and women are separated, and the monastics are separated from the lay community. Strictly speaking, they should only have 3 pieces of clothing and a small collection of personal items, and are even expected to beg for the single meal that they will eat every day. But in practice, especially here in the West, it is difficult for monastics to keep these vows strictly to the letter. And that brings us to the second vehicle, the vehicle of the Mahayana. Now, although this is not accepted by the Theravada community, all other schools of Buddhism believe that the Buddha taught the second turning of the wheel of Dharma at Vulture Peak near Bodh Gaya. Here, the Buddha primarily taught about the two truths, the provisional truth and the ultimate truth, but also about emptiness and bodhicitta. Famously, this is where the Buddha taught the Heart Sutra, that is probably the most famous of all sutras in the Buddhist canon. It is generally associated with Eastern Buddhism, but one should understand that the Mahayana teachings are equally important in Tibetan Buddhism. The very essence of the Mahayana teachings is loving kindness and compassion, and there is less emphasis placed on the generation of renunciation. As with the Hinayana, the Mahayana teaches that the mundane world is nothing but suffering, and that one must seek liberation from this suffering. However, rather than focus on one's own personal liberation, it is taught that one should work to liberate all other sentient beings first from the ocean of suffering before seeking one's own liberation. It is taught that the view of Mahayana Buddhism is the view of emptiness, and the conduct aspect is all about non-harm. And on top of that, it is taught that one should work for the benefit of others. Now, although many of the methods of placement meditation are basically the same as those found in the Theravada tradition, practitioners focus less on the breath and the body, and rather meditate on the present moment of awareness through the practices of Zazen and Shingatasa. In order to develop insight, that is, to recognize primordial wisdom, students are often given unsolvable riddles, or koans as they are called. This is a method used to deconstruct one's conceptual clinging to substantial reality, and therefore realize primordial wisdom. Here in the West, the Eastern tradition is primarily associated with the minimalistic aesthetics of Japanese Zen Buddhism. We envisage monastics living a life of seclusion, wandering through immaculately maintained Zen gardens, engaging in prayer, contemplation, and doing their monastic chores, all conducted mindfully in silence. Although the monks and nuns observe monastic discipline, in general, it is less strict than in the Theravada. In the Japanese Zen tradition, for example, there are also non-celibate monks and nuns who take on a partner and live as husband and wife. And finally, that brings us to the third vehicle, that is the Vajrayana. Now, because of the fame of the Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of the Tibetan people, most are familiar with the outer appearance of Tibetan Buddhist monastics. However, few of the uninitiate have anything but a superficial understanding of what makes Tibetan Buddhism particular and unique amongst all the other iterations of the Buddha's teachings. The teachings of the Vajrayana are associated with the third turning of the wheel of Dharma. And it is said that these teachings were not given in one specific temporal location, but rather were taught simultaneously in various locations across infinite universes throughout beginningless time. These teachings were given to a wide variety of different classes of beings, including humans, spirits, gods, and so forth. But the one thing that all these various types of beings who received the Vajrayana teachings have in common is a special predisposition or karmic tendency for hearing these rare and exceptional teachings. During the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha taught the one single truth. That is the truth of final awakening, also called the truth of lack of characteristics, that focuses primarily on Buddha nature and the union of luminosity and emptiness, free of all elaboration. This is the highest and most profound view of all the Buddha's teachings, and it is said that this can only be grasped by those of the highest intellectual capacity. Vajrayana practice comprises both creation and completion stages, including tantric deity meditation, and the yogic practices of the channels, winds, and drops, and also Mahamudra and Dzogchen, that are said to be the highest form of practice and depend upon realization of the ultimate view. The Vajrayana conduct is a natural consequence of the generation of something called pure vision, where all beings are seen to be male and female deities in union, and the negative emotions themselves are realized to be in essence wisdom. Fully ordained monks and nuns are celibate and keep Buddhist monastic discipline, similar to the monks of Zen Buddhism, but they are much less strict about the lesser vows, some of which are more or less disregarded completely, such as the rule of not eating at inappropriate times and not cutting down trees or cutting grass. As I mentioned earlier, there are lay practitioners who look similar to the monks and nuns, but who do not take a vow of celibacy and also often drink alcohol. Because most Westerners are not able to differentiate between the monks and these lay practitioners who are called mantraists, many have a bad impression of Tibetan monastics, thinking that they behave inappropriately or that they totally disregard their monastic vows. Of course, in all traditions, there are monks and nuns who break their sacred commitments. In fact, this is the reason why the Buddha created these monastic vows in the first place. Nevertheless, in Tibetan communities, it is generally accepted that a monk or nun should be celibate and should not get married. So in summary, there are three basic traditions or vehicles of the Buddha Dharma, each with its own characteristic focus on view, meditation, and conduct. And the question that most people who are new to Buddhism ask is, which tradition is best suited to my needs and my particular disposition? Well, all three traditions are the same inasmuch as they are methods for achieving liberation from suffering in the mundane world. But in order to achieve this liberation, one needs to reduce one's clinging and also eliminate one's strong negative emotions. Now, in general, there are three basic techniques that are used to overcome one's negativities and obscurations. They are abandonment, transformation, and recognition. And whereas these techniques are used to a lesser or greater degree by all practitioners, it is the case that each vehicle predominantly focuses on one of these three techniques respectively. So that means the Hinayana, or Theravada practitioners, primarily devote themselves to abandoning the causes for the arising of the negative emotions, such as greed, anger, etc. In practice, this means that they must leave their families and worldly responsibilities behind and retreat to the monastery or to the wilderness. The men and women live separately and take a commitment to live a life of austere simplicity, with only the bare minimum of worldly necessities and comforts. The Mahayana practitioners, especially those who dedicate themselves to the generation of loving kindness and compassion, will focus less on renunciation and abandoning the world, and primarily practice the path of transformation. The foundation of this practice is mindfulness and the ability to recognize one's own negative tendencies. Through the application of the great Mahayana motivation, they will transform their ordinary selfish concerns into selfless concern for others. The Vajrayana practitioners, and those who principally contemplate the teachings on the ultimate meaning, above all else practice the direct path of recognition. And here, the goal isn't so much to abandon appearances, nor is it to transform one's negativities into something positive, but rather one exerts oneself in the development of insight. That is to say, one learns to recognize the authentic nature of reality, that all phenomena are fundamentally beyond these concepts of good and bad, and inasmuch as the various appearances that arise to mind are essentially pure, neither do they need to be abandoned nor transformed. Now, when it comes to the matter of choosing a vehicle to follow, then regardless of the extent to which that particular tradition resonates with the individual, there are some prerequisites necessary before one is actually able to embark upon that journey. As a bare minimum, and in order to enter the door of the Dharma, in general, one must at least have generated uncontrived renunciation. This means to have recognized the futility of mundane existence. And on top of that, in order to enter the door of the Mahayana Dharma, one also needs to have given rise to relative bodhicitta, that is, uncontrived and limitless love and compassion for all sentient beings. And finally, in order to enter the path of the Vajrayana, one needs to have recognized primordial wisdom. Or to put it another way, to have developed pure vision. On the other hand, however, if one wishes to practice any of these three vehicles merely in a devotional or aspirational manner, then these preconditions do not necessarily need to be fulfilled. That notwithstanding, at very least, one has to have faith in the efficacy of the Buddha's teachings. Well, that's about all I wanted to say on this rather complicated and profound topic. And although at first it might be difficult for some to understand all the various points I have highlighted in this short video, my wish is that at very least this should help you in some way to make an informed decision about your own spiritual journey. And so, good luck with your meditation. Never become disheartened, nor abandon your altruistic intention to achieve awakening. And until next time, see you later.